Hello, I'm Mark Bernstein, and today I'd like to explore how we relate to the web, not only to the familiar World Wide Web of browsers, though that is important, but also to the web we read through computational agents like Siri and Alexa. The experience of reading has always been understood to be a sort of a conversation in which the reader engages with the thought of someone who is not physically present. Until very recently, though, all reading experiences began with the thoughts of a single author, or occasionally the work of a small group. That experience, moreover, was in some sense fixed. Everyone's experience of Paradise Lost is distinct, but in some sense Milton's work remains the same whoever reads it. The docuverse we call the World Wide Web is not like that. Hypertext links make meaning, but that meaning may change as the link destinations change. Much of the internet is in constant flux. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Moreover, the collage of links gives rise to new meaning in hypertext, much as the montage of images gives rise to new ideas in cinema. Tomorrow's web will differ from today's, and your experience will differ from mine. Not only do you bring different thoughts and experiences to your reading, but because we will follow different links, the reading itself will consist of different words. We typically envision reading the web through a browser, but increasingly we read the web through computational agents like Siri or Alexa, aids that help to guide our cars, arrange our calendars, purchase our groceries and our books. These agents learn about our speech and our habits. We train them and they serve us. Or in many cases, they serve us while also serving their corporate masters. Other agents quietly index our photographs, seeking out familiar faces of our families and pets, sorting our photographs by theme, quality, or content. Still other agents study our interests and preferences in order to attract and keep our attention. The neural networks of Facebook, TikTok, and Google strive constantly to find material that will interest us or even better, induce us to buy stuff. All these adaptive texts and systems deliver interlinked texts in various media, which we read or watch or hear. These texts are the work of many hands and sometimes of no human hand at all. They may be generated algorithmically by deep learning networks that intuit the patterns that we recognize as the face of our daughter or our campsite on that trip to Wyoming. Our agents begin like everyone else's, but as we refine them, each becomes unique to us. They are our slaves of steel, and when we read them, when we converse with them, for the first time, we encounter the thought of a writer who is not strictly speaking human, but whose thought nevertheless makes sense. I want to push a bit on the idea of this inhuman author. It has real implications for design, not in some distant future, but today. When I was 7 or 8 years old, my school decided to show an art film about an automobile junkyard. Afterwards, I was distraught. Here were these beautiful machines, once the pride of the families who owned them, and we had watched as they were savagely torn, crushed, and burnt. That spring, or perhaps it was the next year, the building where I had been shown this movie was itself demolished, making way for a new, modern building. I had little connection with the old school. The youngest kids like me used a separate building, the little school, and aside from occasional trips in 2 straight lines to visit the auditorium or the basement craft shop, we had seldom visited the old school. But once again, the work of the wrecking ball left me inconsolable. Why should we mourn for automobiles we never knew, or buildings that had no particular reason to care for us? Well, surely any work of man is flawed, and perhaps therefore we cannot love it. But if we have made a creature who cannot be loved, our creation may justifiably long for a love that it cannot attain, and take reasonable measures for its own happiness. Such questions may seem distant from the web we know, yet closely related questions are already upon us. If you work with an adaptive textbook, perhaps for years, learning from it and changing it as you learn, Would you cast that book aside as you might discard a disposable pen? Having taught your computational agent, as Siri or Alexa, the names and faces of your friends and family, your favorite places to eat and to travel, the titles of all the books you've read, the melodies of years of tunes to which you've listened, would you readily discard that agent and start again? Let's think some more about our emotional bond with computational agents. We discard some things lightly, while others we cannot put aside without a certain pang of remorse. What distinguishes the two? Why do mere things, rocks, ice, stir us? Why would we paint them in moonlight? Could a computational agent be like that? The ideas in this section derive from art philosopher John Ruskin via architect Lars Boybrook. Boybrook's chapter on the digital nature of Gothic is far and away the most important contribution to understanding digital aesthetics of this century. First, anything that claims to possess identity and agency arouses our sympathy. A flower in a florist's arrangement is just a colorful plant, but an alpine flower bravely struggling to emerge from the winter's snow excites our metaphoric imagination. A computer system is mere mechanism, but by addressing us, it implicitly asserts agency. Even programmers and computer scientists tend to respond by treating it politely. Second, things we have chosen with care evoke sympathy that mass-produced commodities do not. Consider an array of handmade pottery cups at an artist's studio. Each has the same shape and capacity, yet each differs slightly in shape and in the glaze's random variations of color and texture. These are handmade, and we are buying them from the master potter himself. Naturally, we take some care to select the cup that speaks to us, even though we know that each of these cups is perfectly adequate. Any of them will hold coffee. An agent that is unique matters more than an agent with a million instances. Finally, things that have responded to us, especially things that have shaped themselves to our needs, have to some extent done us a favor, and we sense that this favor ought to be repaid. The protagonist of Jo Walton's Among Others recalls her grandfather's customary chair, which resented anyone else who tried to sit in it. One 10-penny nail is much like another, but the hammer you have used for a decade, its grip polished smooth except for the gouge where you dropped it that time when you were repairing the roof. That hammer is another thing entirely. One reason our ancestors were buried with their tools is that, missing its late owner, a resentful tool can be dangerous. Hammers, chairs, bits of steel, big rocks, all can excite our sympathy. They are tools, but not mere tools. So, we can care about things, perhaps even computational things, but of course they're still things. Do we ever owe them a duty? People have been talking about this for a long time. Hebe was cupbearer to the gods of Olympus. One day she dropped a cup and spilled the ambrosia. It was a mess. She was scolded severely. Hephaestus came up with a better solution. Instead of relying on a fallible goddess, he built a batch of autonomous tripods. This is the first use of the word autonomous. These were less useful as a subject for sculpture, but they delivered the cocktails with a lot less fuss. Though our slaves of steel are not sapient, we may find reason to treat them well. Good treatment makes economic sense because good servants are always hard to train. Maltreating an adaptive agent could make it less efficient by damaging its learning through blurred generalization or through overfitting.